the New Orleans Humanist Perspective, presented by the New Orleans Secular Humanist Association, following our few principles of humanism.
We're committed to the use of science and reason for understanding the universe and for solving human problems. We're skeptical of untested claims of knowledge, but we're open to new ideas.
We are concerned with securing justice and fairness in society and in ending intolerance and discrimination. We are committed to the total separation of religion and government.
We affirm humanism as a realistic alternative to the theologies of despair and the ideologies of violence. We reject the concept of an afterlife and believe in living a full and rewarding life here and now.
We value and respect each individual's right to judge and lead their lives according to their own position, as long as it's respectful of other people, living in a free society.
We hope you enjoy today's program and others in the weeks to follow.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the New Orleans Humanist Perspective. My name is Charlotte Klasson, president of NOSHA, the New Orleans Secular Humanist Association, and the sponsor of this program. So I will be your host for tonight's show. First, I'd like to tell you a little bit about my guest. Heather Rigney has been with the Louisiana SPCA since 2006 and has 13 years of trapping experience with feral cats. She joined the Louisiana SPCA originally as their disaster preparedness coordinator following Hurricane Katrina, and later took on the role of feral cat coordinator in 2008. She earned her master's in public health through Tulane University and works regularly with the public and the Louisiana SPCA's community clinic to ensure that the street cats of New Orleans are healthy and safe. She has been a lifelong advocate for animals, and when she is not busy supervising the Trap, Neuter, Return program at the shelter or working in the field, she is mother to 3 pet cats, 3 ferals, and 2 dogs. Heather, welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me today.
I thought we would start out kind of with an intro on the basics, such as what is a feral cat?
That is a great question, because it's a question that I do get a lot from the public. The differentiation between a feral cat and a stray or a pet cat is the fact that a feral is not social towards human beings. Very often it's a cat that may have been owned at one point in its life, but it's been abandoned or lost for such a long period that it has lost its ability to trust humans. The other source of feral cats is basically cats that have been born on the street and have never really had much human contact. Because of that, they're often frightened of people, rarely aggressive, but they do try to avoid human contact where possible.
Okay. And why does New Orleans have so many feral cats and other parts of the country do not?
A lot of it really depends on the climate. One thing that you'll find is that those locations that are closer to the equator and have longer periods of light as opposed to dark tend to have a longer breeding season. Because we are in the Gulf South, we tend to have an inordinate amount of light here, which means that our breeding season is basically from about March, around now, end of daylight savings time. The winter months, it slows down considerably. But what you see is street animals in particular that are largely intact tend to get pregnant 2, sometimes even 3 times per year, and those babies are having babies of their own by year end.
Because they just have more time to do that.
Exactly. They go into heat more often, which is, triggered by those light levels.
Okay, that makes so much sense, and I wish I had thought of that on my own, because no one thinks about that, and that makes sense that other parts that are going into sundown at 4 p.m., they're definitely not having that problem. Well then, talk a little bit about the responsibility for feral cats and why that's important to our area.
Certainly. I think a lot of us take responsibility for our own pets. Part of our decision to adopt an animal into our house or to purchase an animal and become its owner is getting medical care for that animal. For people who go above and beyond and perhaps befriend a stray cat in need or a feral cat in need and start putting out food, that doesn't necessarily segue in people's minds into the need to provide medical care. So people will try to be altruistic, put out a little food, a little water, because they're fearful that this animal is starving or in some way disadvantaged. And they don't do anything else up until the point where that cat shows up one day and she's pregnant, or she shows up one day with a trail of little babies following behind, and then the revelation hits people, oh my gosh, I need to do something before I end up feeding 15 cats instead of just this one.
Yeah.
So a lot of people find themselves in that boat.
Okay.
And if you are a feeder of cats, or if you see stray cats in your neighborhood and don't know what their status is spayed or neutered, that is the time to really learn a little bit more, to either take it into your own hands and learn about trapping programs such as ours in the community, or to call your local shelter, local authorities, and find out what options are available.
Okay. And I obviously looking at people who are caring for feral cats or cats in need, what should they do?
Well, first I would say is, if you can get close enough to your feral, and sometimes that's an easier said than done behavior, you want to check for what we call an ear tip on the cat. An ear tip is basically a universal symbol that a cat has been spayed or neutered through a street cat program. You see it all throughout 50 states, as well as internationally in certain countries. And what happens is during the surgical process, the vet or the veterinary technician will take a little flat notch off the top of one ear that makes it identifiable at a distance that the cat has been spayed or neutered, so that individuals who are trying to catch them are not trapping the same cat over and over again,
They can just let
subjecting them to unnecessary transport, unnecessary anesthesia. So if you have a group of cats, the first thing you want to do is look for that little ear tip. It's pretty easily identified. The standard convention is to do the left ear for a female cat and the right ear for the male. So we always tell folks to check both ears.
Left for the female, right for
Left for the ladies is how I always say it.
Left for the ladies and right for the male.
Not
I
all
did not
clinics
know that.
follow that, but many of them, particularly in the New Orleans area, do.
Oh, okay.
So not only are you going to learn your neuter status, you're also going to learn the gender of the cats that you're caring for if you see that.
Very good. That's something I didn't know. Thank you. Yeah.
And if they have the little, perky cat ears that you're used to seeing in your own house pet, chances are, it's a 50-50 proposition that you may be dealing with an intact animal. If you do happen to catch a cat that was an abandoned or lost animal and bring it in, that's a little bit of your time and effort just to confirm that you're on the safe side and that the cat has been vetted and is in good health.
Okay. Well, very good. What is the trap, neuter, return program, and how does it benefit cats in the community? I know that's kind of a scary thing for people to think that they're taking animals and putting them back in their environment. So if you can talk about that.
I say there's a lot of elements that really go into it. Trap, neuter, and return is basically what it sounds like. You trap a feral cat with a humane trap. You spay or neuter it. In many cases, that's paired with a vaccination or a series of vaccinations at the clinic that you use. And then the idea is to return it to the territory from which it came. It used to be known as trap, neuter, and release, and unfortunately people were releasing them to neighborhoods other than their own, which is not really ideal. I mean, in many cases, that cat is very bonded to the territory that it comes from. It has access to food, water, and shelter, and if you simply dump it out in another area, not only is that against the law, from a practical you and me point of view, but it also means that that animal may not have the means to survive in the new place it goes. So trap, neuter, and return is basically, a round the bend process of picking them up at point A, getting their medical services provided, returning them back out.
To point A.
Exactly. The advantages are that, that animal is not going to drop litters in your neighborhood. He or she is not going to be prone to having all those nuisance behaviors that you might be associating with mating, such as the howling, the fighting, the spraying, so on and so forth. Your female cats are not going to die in childbirth. Your males are not going to be crossing territories such as roads to find those females, and will probably be subject to fewer car accidents, fewer fights with other territorial males, which could lead to disease processes. So overall, there's a lot of benefits to TNR. Some people still ask, what's wrong with simply removing a cat from the neighborhood and bringing it to a shelter? So,
and that's true. It's if an animal really is a lost pet, cat, and you then
Right.
then y'all can evaluate obviously the
Right.
behavior.
And what I
So
would
that
say is, if you suspect that the animal that you're caring for is a lost pet, you can note that on the paperwork, at least with our clinic, and I would imagine any clinic, and they can use a scanner to scan it for a microchip,
Right.
which at least if that animal has been to a vet or has been adopted from a shelter, there's a very good chance that they have that microchip and can be reunited with an owner.
Okay.
You know,
Right.
I personally, my thought is that regardless of whether you think it's pet, stray, or feral, going through the steps for the TNR is better for the community, it's better for the
Right.
animal.
Right.
And you can simply bring an animal to the shelter and have it scanned or, look through the lost reports as well without having to turn it in. For a
Okay.
feral cat, being turned into a shelter is often a one-way street because most
Right.
people are not going to adopt out a cat that is frightened of people. So
Right, because-
unless they
yeah.
can go back home again, the only option is to find an alternate venue. And finding somebody who wants to adopt a stray cat that's frightened of them is not the easiest prospect unless they're
Oh,
looking
sure.
for rodent control for their barn, their stable, their country home, their restaurant, their bar. I mean, we've had adopters for barn cats come through
I
the
wanted
shelter.
to touch on
but-
that later.
yeah, it's
that's
a
an
great
interesting
program,
Yeah.
but too many people see it as an easy out and say, can you please take my cat because, I feed this cat and I think it could do better. Well, often the absolute very best is putting it exactly where it came out from.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That is a hard one, I think, for people to understand. Well, then you may have kind of gone over the steps, but what happens at a TNR clinic? Because I assume the SPCA here has a clinic for people who are doing this
We do.
routinely. So it's going through the same process, and it's not. So yes,
Exactly.
talk about those steps.
Sure. We have what we call the community clinic, and it is a public clinic. It's preventive health only, so they do work with people and their domestic pets, their dogs, their cats, their rabbits. We do shots, we do microchipping, we do spay and neuter, some limited dental surgeries, things like that. A component of that is that we do have a very active feral cat spay-neuter program through our community clinic. And I would say probably half to 2/3 of our feline clientele are through the TNR program, which equates to about approximately 3,000 cats a year that we spay or neuter through TNR.
Okay.
So basically the way that it would look like is, either with their own personal traps or with traps that they borrow from the shelter. People who are caring for cats can actually set those traps in their yard, bait them, trap the animal or animals that they're looking to spay or neuter, and bring them in for their appointment at the clinic. Once they're in the clinic, what we do is give them a very cursory health exam. Because they're feral, you can't really give them a checkup that you would with a personal pet, but you're going to look at their overall body condition.
And see if there are any real problems.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that cat, once it's been checked by a vet, is anesthetized, vaccinated for rabies if it's over 3 months old. If it's under 3 months old, we give it an FERCP, which is a type of vaccine that prevents feline calicivirus, rhinotracheitis, upper respiratory infections, things
Okay.
like that.
That's good.
Just to boost the kitten's immune system if it's younger than the 3 months. We also will spay or neuter it, regardless of pregnancy status, regardless of gender.
Okay.
We make it same cost, affordable to as many as can do it. And once the animal has been spayed or neutered, we allow that animal to recover in its trap overnight, and then the folks can pick it up the following day, bring it back out to their neighborhood, release it from the trap, and it goes about its life.
Okay. That's. It sounds like y'all have finally have it down. The process goes
It has
very.
become a science.
Yeah,
TNR
yeah.
has existed since probably the mid-'90s, and
Okay.
we began the TNR process here in New Orleans in 1997,
So-
doing probably about 300 cats a year. So we have come a very long way.
Okay. And one thing, what age should cats be spayed or neutered? How early can they be?
Well, every vet has their own opinion. Our veterinary staff at Louisiana SPCA is very comfortable doing them at about 2.5 pounds in body weight.
Okay, I thought
that
they had to be-
equates to approximately 10 to 12 weeks in age,
Okay.
especially if you have a healthy cat in your care. And the idea behind it is that you want the animal to be big enough to be able to process the anesthesia correctly,
Right.
and to have a very high survival rate. And that's what we feel
So
is
2.5
appropriate,
pounds.
at least
Okay.
through our clinic. If you go to a different clinic, you may get a different opinion.
Right.
But the idea is to try to do it as early as possible so that the animal never becomes pregnant.
Right.
And hopefully never goes through puberty and has to undergo all those rigors of being on the street with that kind of circumstance.
You did mention, and this is something that I think a lot of people probably don't know. Can you spay a cat that is pregnant or nursing? Because I think that you can, but you might have more information about it.
Right. Again, you certainly can spay a cat that is pregnant. With our breeding seasons, as wild and crazy as they are, you don't really have much alternative because about half of what you're catching during breeding season is probably in some stage of pregnancy.
I was wondering that, how many you were finding.
One thing that the person needs to keep in mind that if we are doing the surgery, it is a full hysterectomy, so they will lose their litter. If they're late term, they'd sometimes need a little more fluid therapy. So it's up to the veterinarian if he or she decides that the cat is too far along or not. Typically, we try to do it under any and all circumstances where possible, just because our goal is to end feline overpopulation. But if you have a question, the best thing to do is to call and speak to the clinic itself and find out what their rules and regulations are about cats in pregnancy. As far as nursing mother cats, we prefer that the mother cats stay with the babies until they are at least partially weaned and able to eat some solid food on their own, which is around 4 to 5 weeks of age. Then it's pretty safe to separate mom from babies, leave babies on premises for 24 hours and bring mommy in for her surgery. And then when the babies hit that 2.5 to 3 month period, it's their turn to go.
Okay. It never stops, does it? Could you talk a little bit about the laws, why should you do the TNR if you do have some issues with neighbors complaining or things like that?
Well, one thing that might be unfamiliar to a lot of our audience is that the laws did change about 3 years ago. If you live in New Orleans, the New Orleans City Council did amend a lot of our local animal ordinances, which are located in Chapter 18. One thing they made a revision of is that feral cats that have undergone a TNR program have some limited protections under the law so that they are allowed to roam in the neighborhood, whereas before, if they weren't fixed, they had to stay on the caretaker's property, which was kind of interesting. Trying to get a cat that's not social to you to stay within the fence line is difficult.
That's right.
The TNR process kind of assumes that these animals are not generating as many nuisance behaviors, that they're not dropping litters in your neighbor's lawns. So it does give them that freedom to roam. However, if you are a caretaker of feral cats, that right to care for them also has certain responsibilities to attach to it. And those are for the protection of your neighbors who are not necessarily cat owners or cat lovers. Just like you may be a person who doesn't like your neighbor who doesn't scoop the doggy doo, there is a certain clause in the law that says if you are a caretaker, you're responsible for maintaining the waste. So picking up your own yard, I would say around the curb areas. Making sure that you either have some sort of sandbox or litter box area in your yard to discourage the cats from going on your neighbor's properties. The minimum standards of care as far as keeping food and water bowls clean and neat and tidy and not overflowing also applies to a cat caretaker as it would to an owner of a cat or dog that's a pet and being fed outdoors. So those types of things are certainly within the law just to make sure that people are doing it the right way and not the wrong way. Because we want this, we don't want this to be a turf war between neighbors. One of the wonderful things about trap, neuter, return is that it does cut down on so many nuisance behaviors, and not only that, it provides a benefit to the community because you're getting rodent control provided by these animals instead of having to expend money on exterminators. So if you're going through all these efforts to get this done, take the extra step, be a good neighbor, talk to your neighbor, and if there is a communication issue, try to work out the differences.
And letting them know that comes with it,
Exactly.
that does help in an area that
It's a
probably
two-way
has-
street,
Yeah, that,
you know.
that I assume the temperatures and the weather lead to having higher rodent populations as well.
It certainly does.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that we are a port city alone tells you
That,
with,
yeah.
with sewers and canals and raised homes and all our post-Katrina blighted properties. I mean, there's so many venues where
Rodents are just
and
there.
roaches and lizards and snakes, and I mean, all the pests that we see in New Orleans will come out if the cat population disappears. So it's our benefit to keep the cats in the community, as long
that's
as we're not
true.
allowing them to breed out of control.
Right.
So.
Well, what is a feral cat caretaker, and how does it differ from a feeder? Because I don't know if you actually hit that earlier, but
I haven't actually,
Okay.
and there is
Very
an
good.
actual difference within the law. A feeder is considered somebody who simply puts out food and water for a stray or feral cat and doesn't go the extra step to provide any sort of medical care. So if you are a feeder of intact cats, then you don't really have any protections under the law. You are still certainly allowed to feed, but at the same time, anybody, whether it's humane law, whether it's your neighbor, can put out a trap, scoop up your cat, bring it to the shelter, and you have no recourse. If you are a caretaker, that means you've gone the extra step to put your cats through a trap, neuter, return program. And the presence of that ear tip on the cat is protective. If somebody
okay.
calls and says that they have a complaint about your cat, our animal control, our humane law division is legally not allowed to pick up that cat unless it is sick or injured.
I see.
Now,
Okay.
that still gives you, as a property owner, the right to set traps on your own property, so long as you're bringing the cat to the shelter and giving the caretaker or the owner a chance to reclaim it and to work through those mediation concerns. But we're hoping that most of those folks that may have a concern about the cat, once they know that it's spayed and neutered, once they are educated to what an ear tip on a cat means, realizes that this is not the can of worms that they think it is, that these animals are healthy and sterile
Right.
and not creating the problem that they might envision.
Right, and it seems that it would be very helpful for people within a neighborhood, like if you have a association or something, just for basic safety issues and things, that there might be people who kind of could coordinate the fact that this is happening, so that people would understand that the program is in place. So
Right.
maybe something that they're educating within a neighborhood, that must be a huge help,
Definitely.
because then that takes care of that education for that you guys are trying to provide.
It's
so
an excellent point, and I will say that the best success, in certain neighborhoods that we have had with trap, neuter, and return is when people in a community work together. We have had people, who are caring for the cats, and they let the neighbors know ahead of time what they're doing.
Right.
And those people, I'll help transport them even though I can't trap them, or I'm willing to watch them if you have to go out of town on business, or I'll contribute some money toward the cost of the surgery. And it becomes a community effort.
Right.
Everybody buys into it. Not only is that better for the caretaker, but that's a safety net for the animals as well.
Right.
And that's always great to see. We love talking to neighborhood associations or businesses that have cats at their location, and actually building a training component into that, getting them involved. That way they feel invested in it.
Right. Oh, definitely. And I feel like that's probably part of what makes it difficult for some people, because they try to do things independent because they've had some problems with a neighbor who only sees it as a nuisance.
Right.
I guess, what are the most common complaints? I mean, we've kind of touched on just the mess of having animals that are roaming, but
Right.
are there other things that are kind of odd that come up in this?
I have heard just about everything in the book. I mean, typically the fear of cats breeding out of control is the number one issue,
That
and
would-
TNR addresses that, nips it in the bud right away. Urine and feces is certainly another one. With the urine, the spaying and neutering process does cut down on that really acidic smell that's in the urine, because they're not secreting those pheromones and
Oh, that's
spraying them
right.
to attract mates or to ward off competition.
Right.
So it may not eliminate it completely, but you do see a drastic lessening of that. The feces is another concern, and like I said, we offer deterrent information to the complainants and direction on how to set up an appropriate elimination area for the caretakers. Fleas is another one.
Yes.
And we talk to folks about appropriate spraying of their yards and so on and so forth. We also have some tips on how to use home remedies to treat your yard for fleas, how you can actually, keep the fleas off your cats, even though you can't necessarily pet them and squirt medication on them, and so on and so forth.
Okay, that's interesting.
So there's a lot of little things that you can try, different things to keep them out of certain areas of your yard, like your gardens or off your porch or out from under your car. So those are the kind of things we talk to every day.
Right, I bet. I can imagine that. Well, one thing that you did mention earlier, and I had happened coincidentally to come across an article that has to do Chicago and feral cats and how they have a very active program of people getting cats to remedy the rat rodent problem in their area, like at a business, and how a lot of people are very attached to that. And I thought we might touch on that at the very end here, just because being a city with a bunch of restaurants and properties. Is that a program that's taking off?
Yes, we actually piloted what we call the Barn Cat program through Louisiana SPCA about a year and a half ago.
Barnyard program.
Barn Cat program.
Barn Cat program.
But it doesn't have to be a barn. I mean, obviously we're a city. We don't have a whole lot of those around. And even though we do, adopt out feral cats that come over our front counter to places like, St. Tammany, Folsom, wherever, the main goal is to really find a local placement. And we've worked with a lot of folks that are just caring for cats in their backyard and don't mind feeding an extra one or two. We have worked with bars. We have worked with restaurants. We have worked with churches and synagogues. We have worked with florists. And most of them actually have their own cat populations. They don't necessarily adopt from us, but will spay and neuter the cats that are already there. And in certain circumstances, people will call us and say, I have no cats, and I need a few good mousers. We don't encourage people to turn in feral cats under any circumstances, but every once in a while we'll get one that can't go back out for whatever reason, and it's wonderful to have an outlet for that cat or that cat and its companions here in the community where they're actually going to be valued members and being fed by somebody who has taken on that responsibility.
Right, and they have a job to do, so it's kind of like they're a worker in society, kind of helping businesses.
And we find that those people who adopt our barn cats end up being ambassadors for the entire program because they see the value and they talk to other people about it. So whether you're using our TNR program, whether you're using our barn cat program, coming to one of our educational seminars, we love to talk to the public about ferals.
Oh, well, that's great. And I think you mentioned that you have a program coming up that you did want to at least let people know about.
Certainly. We're actually offering a class. It's called TNR, The Basics and Beyond. It's a 2-hour free class. It's a lecture format, and it's for folks that are neophytes all the way up to experienced caretakers. Our next class is January 21st at the Louisiana SPCA, and you can go onto our website to look over the details or to find out later classes.
Great. I think that's all the time we have today, but please join us soon again for another one of our shows. Thank you very much.